Well, shall we get rocking and rolling?
Oh, it's good. Is that good?
You got a
That's
wife?
good.
Yeah, I haven't had a cigar in
A week.
a couple of weeks,
A
so
couple weeks, okay.
this feels all right.
Good.
I waited for you.
I appreciate that. It's like the new Promise Keepers.
Instead of the purity ring, it's the cigar ring you pull off the cigar.
Exactly.
Paper
I'll
ring.
wait for you.
Oh boy, man,
That's
we better
good.
get cracking on
I
some
know.
cigars and
Some
whiskey.
B-roll here. Well, Christian, welcome back to your house again, back to your deck.
And to the viewers and listeners, welcome back to our ramblings of the Old Fashioned Dad podcast. Hopefully the training wheels will not fall off, and we will be able to keep this tricycle going, or
Yes.
bicycle with training wheels going, something like that.
Trek.
So, without further ado, let's jump into the cigars, which we should spend a minute talking about because they are tasty,
Yep.
and the whiskey.
All right, sounds good.
We are the Old Fashioned Dad podcast, seeking to love dads and men through the person and work of Jesus Christ, while entering into tough conversations on marriage, mental health, sex, and parenting, all while sipping good whiskey.
So,
And we're back! Hey, all right, guys.
tell us about the cigars. What do we got here?
I am smoking...
Show that up.
Yes, I am. If I can read this mood light, I'm smoking a match play.
Match
which
play.
I'm not sure who makes that. If you watch it on the YouTubes, holding it up there for you.
Just by the wrapper, it looks like it's going to be kind of a more of a lighter body cigar.
It's a little lighter. I usually like a medium. This is part of a sample pack of Dominican cigars from Thompson Cigar Company. You're smoking another one of those. What do you have?
So before I took the little label keeper off, this one is called, it was either just Gringo or the Gringo. I think it was just Gringo. It's actually a pretty cool little cigar ring, but I would say this is, just based on the wrapper, a little darker, but it's smoking very evenly, and you know what? I think it's going to pair up nicely with the whiskey that we are about to drink.
All right, what are we drinking tonight, Christian?
Now, I'm surprised that I have not been able to, or that I haven't at this point introduced you to, this is quite possibly one of my favorite whiskeys, and you can get it up here in Seattle. So,
Okay. And I have actually had this one before. I think it was a birthday gift, maybe my 40th.
okay.
So,
Well, you're going to have to
It
get
didn't last long. It was good.
It's very, very good.
Yeah.
This, Eagle Rare. Now, for a lot of you whiskey and bourbon aficionados, Eagle Rare, you know of that one. But for those who don't know, Eagle Rare comes out of Buffalo Trace Distillery, the storied distillery that produces Pappy Van Winkle 15 and 21 and 23 and all the whiskeys that you'll never be able to drink. But,
Why? Because they're too expensive?
yes,
Okay.
you'll never find them.
The top shelf.
Well, if you do,
Top shelf.
yeah, top shelf.
Okay.
The shelf above the top shelf.
I can't even reach it so high.
Yeah, you need a booster seat. But Eagle Rare is really good because this is I would say, one of the best value bourbons on the market. It's about, I think I can get it over at Safeway for about $40, and it's a 10-year aged bourbon. You're not going to find, in my opinion, that kind of deal out there, especially in Seattle. So if you get an opportunity to get some Eagle Rare, stockpile it, because prices are only going to go up, especially if they keep winning awards. So let's why don't we pour some of this so you can
do it.
try it. I'm going to pour yours first because I'm a gentleman
Oh, well, you are a gentleman. And a scholar.
and a scholar.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to go so far on that second
I
one.
know.
Here we go. Ooh,
It's good. It's good. Nice and dark. You can hear the pour.
nice and dark.
Oh, yes.
There we go. Let's see if I can get it close here to my microphone. Pour it. Oh, some good ASMR right there.
What does that mean?
I don't remember what the actual acronym means, but it's like this people. It's like sounds that people go nuts over,
Okay.
like people walking on the ground or the rustling of leaves, and it's just that.
Sure. Or like
Yeah.
this, like slurping.
Uh,
I mean, not in a good way.
not in a good way. So,
Crunching of snow beneath your feet.
one thing that we've gotten away from on the Old Fashioned Dad podcast, and we do have to say sorry, is we haven't spent a little bit of time talking about the whiskey and a little bit of time talking about the cigars. So let's take a minute. Let's sip this.
All right.
Maybe
sip it.
cheers at first.
Cheers.
I brought out the nice glassware too for us.
That's good. Try not to break this one. That is good.
So I get caramel and coconut,
Okay.
toasted oats. I get some corn and oak, and tiny bit of licorice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ditto.
He gets the same thing.
I get the warm belly because it's empty. But I mean, it is kind of fun just to be able to like feel like the warmness going down into your stomach.
So good. So I learned an interesting trick. I went out to a distillery this past weekend and met with a guy owner of Bainbridge Distillery, and he knows vastly more about whiskey than I will ever know or hope to know. But I one day hope to achieve his level of knowledge.
Now, why did you go out there? Like to learn for your distilling?
Mostly, I went out because I wanted to make a connection for our distillery.
Okay.
And meet with another.
And what distillery is that? Are you guys actually selling stuff on the market now?
We're not selling stuff yet on the market. Our product is still in trademark at the moment. So once our name is about to be trademarked, so hopefully I'll be able to share that. But for now, I'm not. I'll share with you afterwards.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, but I learned an interesting trick. So you take a little bit of the whiskey if you really want to taste the notes,
Okay.
and you rub it on your hand, and you keep going until the alcohol starts evaporating and your hand starts feeling like it's starting to dry off.
Okay.
And so hopefully it's getting there soon. Okay, so my hand is starting to feel like it's drying off. Then you go to smell it. And you're able to pull out more notes than you would out of the whiskey sitting in the glass, because oftentimes what you pull out of the glass is the alcohol.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to try that next time I'm at a bar. The stranger next to me, I'll just wipe some on their hand.
Yeah, wipe it on their hand
Yeah,
as
on their
opposed to
hand.
yours. You're
Right.
sure not to creep them out.
No, not at all. That's how I'd like to, it's an icebreaker.
It is an icebreaker. Hey, you got that lighter somewhere?
I do, yes. Oh, party foul. We'll just keep talking.
So, for all those who can't see, Christian knocked over the lights, and so we
My
are
bad.
without lights at the moment. But
We don't have a jerry-rigged system here at all.
hopefully, we will be able to
got it.
retain interest by me talking about how boring this is at the moment. But Christian will put it back together. In the meantime,
I got it.
Oh, you do. Good. Does it need slack?
Yeah, I got it.
There it is.
Okay.
All right, everybody.
There you go.
I know you're all worried. While Christian is setting that up, we have a topic today that I thought would be kind of interesting to talk about, and that is the topic
Oh
of
my gosh.
tithing.
Okay, I'm just gonna edit this out.
So we're going to talk
This is
about
painful.
the topic of tithing, which I think is interesting because there's a lot of commentary and feedback on how much should you tithe, and even perspective of what should you tithe and what is a tithe. And maybe that's something that hopefully we can define and jump into over the hopefully the next 20 minutes if we get power back. But yeah, there we go.
It's like a Griswold moment here.
Yeah.
Good.
There-
You situate that since I'm
There
not
it
doing
is.
so good.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, don't
So
move.
don't touch
Don't move.
anything. We've got lights back. It's great. So we're talking about tithing, Christian.
Tithing. Okay, yes. Yep.
Tithing. We're in
Yes.
this now.
Yep.
Don't put that away. Don't put this away.
Okay, I
We
just
might need it
didn't
again.
want it to get too cold because
Yeah,
then it doesn't work
then it
very
doesn't
well.
work,
Yeah,
right.
You can hold it. That's cool.
So tithing. That's kind of a Bible term, isn't it?
It is specifically.
Because you don't hear about it in really any other area of life too much.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a
Or at all.
specific. Yeah, specifically, an Old Testament thing. We're basically. Oh my gosh. Lights went out again. Where specifically, was it the priests or it's probably God initially, but basically 10% of what you had, your first fruits were given to the church. And the idea behind it is that God doesn't want your money; He wants your heart.
Yes.
And if you give of your first fruits, which back then probably wasn't actual money. It was probably like
It was literally fruit or
right, whatever,
livestock,
right,
or
whatever
grain, or
whatever your livelihood was. It would be
Right.
10% of the best of that.
right.
Yeah, to show that like my heart is obedient and I trust that God has is stewarding me and providing this to me, so I'm giving that back to him out of trust.
Yeah. So essentially, a tithe is giving a portion back of what God has already given you back to Him.
Yes.
Right. And that's oftentimes, as we see in the modern days, used to bless people within the church, and that can bless the homeless, the impoverished, and that's really kind of the practical function of a tithe. But the spiritual and relational function of a tithe is kind of checking your heart on where does all things, good things, come from,
Right.
and how tightly do you hold on to that, and how willing are you to give back to God?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think I'll speak for myself. My tendency is to be legalistic and be like, okay, 10%, check, there's that box. But that's not what God's after. He's not after the money per se. He's after, like I said, our hearts. And so when I do that, typically I'm not super disciplined on it. So like I'll not tithe for a couple months and then kind of go back and calculate it. And before I do it, I bring it to my wife and I pray about it, because I want to make sure I'm not just writing a check and not thinking about it, or doing an online payment, not thinking about it. I want to make sure it's like, okay, this is, a chunk of money. I pray that, God blesses that, and that He, continues to refine my heart to want to be generous with others, because He was first generous to us.
Yeah. As you're talking about this, and going back to how we were kind of defining tithing, the famous story, infamous or famous, however you want to look at it, of Cain and Abel kind of came to mind.
Yep.
And so, what was kind of significant about that storyline? Because I think it's relevant for this conversation.
Sure. I mean, I from what I remember of it, one of them was a farmer. The other one, had livestock essentially, and so I think they were both burnt offerings. But one of them was accepted while the other one wasn't, and so God was pleased with Abel's sacrifice and accepted it. The smoke went up, and with Cain's it didn't. It went down, and that pissed off Cable.
Cable.
Cain.
Yes. I knew what you were saying.
Yeah. And so much so they killed his brother over it, out of that jealousy. And I think that a lot of commentators, say that it wasn't a matter of like there were different sacrifices. It was a matter of the heart of the person giving it.
Right, and you can see some of the language, if I remember right, from Genesis was Abel offered livestock, and then Cain offered like grains and fruits and stuff like that. But Abel offered the choice. Choice?
Going through puberty again?
Going through puberty again, guys. Abel offered the choicest of his flock.
The best.
The best of the best.
Yeah, which is what we mean by first fruits, which is also kind of a Christianese
Yeah, that's
thing.
another Christianese term, I guess. But first fruits. So he offered the best of his best. It's like when you get your paycheck, you give money out of the paycheck first to God,
right.
Rather than paying yourself, paying the government first. That's kind of this is what Abel did, So he gave God the best of his flock, which was like indicative of where his heart was. And so then Cain comes, he gives God an offering, but it's not of the choice. It's not of the first fruits. It's probably still a decent offering, in terms of the quality of stuff, but in terms of his heart, he was withholding from God. He was holding back. And so because he looked at Abel's response that he got from God, and he's jealous. Jealous to the point where he's like, well, I'm going to go ahead and kill you, which is an odd response. My response possibly could have or would have been, well, I'm not going to kill you. I'm just going to be bitter at you and passive aggressive, because that's what Seattleites do.
It's true.
Anyway,
back in Genesis, there was no Seattle, but
there was no Seattle. That is absolutely true. Factual statement. Factual statement. So now looking forward, are we commanded to tithe?
I don't believe so. As far as the Old Testament law goes, but I still practice, and a lot of Christians do, is just kind of a guidance. Guidance, is that a word? A guidepost.
A guidance. I like
Yeah,
that one.
guidance. Just for a mechanism to give to the church, to whatever body they're part of. I still kind of use the 10% as a general rule, but I don't know. I mean, maybe this is a conversation here. If it matters, if like it specifically has to go to a church, or sometimes we have like friends in need or a certain situation, and we'll use money that we wouldn't normally tithe and give it to that. So I don't know how particular God is about that, as long as our heart's in the right place. But I mean, I think to the point of the story of Cain and Abel, God knows when we're trying to like round down and skirt, like actually giving our first fruits, whether it's 10% or whatever number. I think God knows when our heart's not in it, and we don't want to be generous, and we don't want to give, and we want to like hold tightly to what we feel is ours and hard earned.
I remember listening to some sermons back in our MH days, Marshall days.
Yes, Marcel. Yes. It's the insider lingo.
the
MH.
Yeah.
No one says that.
Nobody says that except me right now. Where some of the sermons were kind of focused on tithe and giving,
Yep.
and some of it said, people 10% is kind of the common place that a lot of modern day Christians land, but it wasn't uncommon to give up to like say 25%.
Sure, because there's all these kind of other
right,
things.
and so what I think a lot of Christians do is like, hey, 10% is earmarked out of my income for the church, out of my earnings, and then I'm also going to give financially in other areas outside of the church, for the sake of the gospel.
Sure.
So like maybe give to overseas missions, or you sponsor kids,
adopt
or
a child, or
yeah,
something.
exactly.
Yep.
So I think that a lot of Christians could be getting closer to that 25% mark, but I think the whole idea behind tithe is really honoring and respecting where all things come from, and being able to give back. And actually, the issue of stewardship is here as well. Like, how are we stewarding things? And so God puts this vehicle of tithe in front of us as a way to kind of check our hearts. And I think that if you're part of a local church, I think, and your heart is daily being regenerated, I think there's going to be kind of this natural tendency or inclination to want to give.
Sure.
And I don't think that your heart is to make it all the way up to 10%, and then you've achieved like varsity Christian or something like
Sure,
that.
that should be like the starting place of our generosity, hopefully.
Yeah, and Scripture also says to give cheerfully, to give joyfully, to give sacrificially.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way that we're supposed to look at tithe.
Right.
And I want to steer away. I know I just use that word "supposed to," which kind of has that obligatory sound to it. Like we're supposed to give, we're obligated to give. Really, honestly, it's a joy to give. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be able to give, and that's how I know for me I've been convicted to look at tithing. It's like, man, I get to give back to God. Like He gives me 100% of everything that I have, and He's only asking for 10% back. Great, that's a good deal for me. I get to keep 90% and He gets 10%. Wow, that's a fantastic deal.
Do you get to keep it, or are you stewarding it?
Stewarding it, another Christian's word, right?
Which we've covered in other episodes, but I mean, essentially, it means that God's lending us these resources to do His will with, which is a whole other topic for another time, I guess. But I think that's the whole. I don't know, I'll go on a limb. I think that's the whole idea behind tithing, is remembering where our blessings come from, where our money comes from, where our comforts come from. And you mentioned earlier is talking about giving joyfully and sacrificially. Now that's something that we as Americans don't really like, because sacrifice means it's going to be uncomfortable, and most of our life is in pursuit of comfort.
I mean, is it on the the Statue of Liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where's that put? I know that's.
Well, I mean that's in the Declaration of Independence.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, initially it was going to be property, but they swapped it out for pursuit of happiness.
Right, and so I mean, as Americans, that's how we function. That's how we. I'm not keeping this lighter warm. That's how we function, right? So we live in a place where we're told, hey, we have an inalienable right that comes, to live, life, liberty. We have an inalienable right to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so, tithing in a way kind of gets in the way of pursuit of happiness, because you have to give sacrificially and you have to give joyfully, or I shouldn't say you have to. It should be like you get to give sacrificially and joyfully, but
so it sounds like your heart was revealed there.
I know it was. I have to give joyfully.
Some repentant either.
I'm gonna have to be trite there, but yeah, I think as Americans this is really difficult because we want to kind of define
Sure.
what we give.
I mean, do you think in the this last year of COVID that like people use that kind of as an excuse to like tithe less? Like, I'm not going to a church. What's my church doing for me? Do I have to give, or it's fallen by the wayside? I mean, obviously this is speculation, but I'm just kind of...
I think it's great speculation because I think in general, even before COVID, people had that perspective of, hey, what's the church doing for me?
Kind of like a exchange of goods, which is how the rest of our
I paid
society
you.
works.
I mean, think about customer service. The customer's always right. So I mean, I think a lot of people bring that mentality into the church.
Sure, inevitably, which I think we need to be intentional and fight against. To not be consumer Christians of a church, seeker sensitive and all that stuff. But that's also another topic of how do you pick a church? What's a church community?
And that actually might be a really good topic for next time. How do you pick a church?
Sure.
Yeah.
Or does the church pick you?
Or church shopping.
Oh, yes.
Church shopping.
Church
That should
shopping.
be another topic.
Sure.
Maybe that one is one we'll cover. Where are you going with that? Say. I had a really great thought.
Oh, I don't remember. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe it'll come back around.
I could stop this.
So I think as Americans we want to define what we give and when we give, and we want the church to be able to be like, well, we're gonna, since you gave tithe, we're gonna go ahead and treat you like the customer, make sure that all your whims and needs or wants and needs are met.
Sure.
But I think this is one of the functions of tithe. It kind of works like a thermometer, in that it kind of takes our temperature, or it's a indicator of where our heart is at, when it comes to giving, and how do we even approach the gospel, and how do we approach the local church. A lot of people are jaded by the local church. A lot of people are hurt and say no, I don't want to give because they've hurt, or they're a bunch of broken people.
Sure, which I mean, it's a whole nother topic of like, what is church community? I can't tell you how many Christians or deists or whatever have told me like, I love Jesus, but I hate the church. I don't believe in organized religion, but I like what Jesus teaches.
What's a deist?
A deist just means like.
Sorry, I'm saying that for the.
Oh, sorry. I mean, just someone who, like, in general believes in Christian principles and maybe even likes, God, but doesn't particularly like, doesn't believe Jesus is the risen Savior.
They function more on like
moral
deism,
like
deism.
Thomas Jefferson's a classic deist.
Pick and choose what you want to believe.
Yeah. So I mean, he was certainly had principles loosely based in Judeo-Christian, principles, but probably you couldn't really call him a Christian. But where was I going with this?
I was asked. I kind of created a digression here because I was like, hey, for our listeners, what's a deist?
Right. But before that,
we were talking about how tithing is kind of a litmus test or an indicator of where your heart is at, and I think most Christians they don't want to give. They'd rather be served.
Yeah, it didn't really help. Didn't bring it back, but that's okay.
I got a question for you.
All right, good.
Good. You couldn't stall any longer.
Yeah.
Fortunately, this is a podcast that people know that this is like two dudes talking in a backyard.
I know what I was going to say.
Okay.
You keep on to your question. So it kind of brings up the question of community, right? Like, church community, people being kind of jaded against the church, or specifically around giving money.
Yeah.
And I think there's kind of a legitimate complaint or suspicion of that, which would be kind of the name it, claim it prosperity gospel, where it's abused.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where your level of holiness is based on how much money you give the church, or the televangelist or whatever, and there's definitely some abuse there and some really poor theology that goes something along the lines of, if you give money, you do it because God wants you to be rich. He doesn't want you to be poor. Why do you want you to be poor? And so it's kind of this give to get. So it's empty of the actual gospel and the actual Jesus, and it's just to enhance our pocketbook. And so you get some pastors, flying around on personal leisure jets, taking advantage of
G6,
poor people.
G6 jets.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not last year's model, this year's.
It's for emissions.
But I mean, I think that there's some validity in that, but then there's also I think some excuses that we make to not live sacrificially, or not give, or not be involved. Sit by the sidelines and critique the church, and criticize all the things that are wrong with the broken people in church, while not participating, not giving, not both with our time and with our money. I was convicted of that, kind of early on at Mars Hill, of just kind of being a consumer Christian. I just sit back and I take, while others give and serve and volunteer and give their money. Yeah. And I remember one sermon specifically, and Mark was just laying the hammer down on getting off the sidelines. He's like, if you're sitting on the sidelines not giving, you don't have any right to say anything. Like, put your jersey on, get in the game. Yeah. And the fact is, I mean, we're all sinners. The church is made of sinners. It's going to be messy. That's no excuse not to be involved, not to care. I mean, Jesus came and died for the church, not for you individually, for the church body that you're a part of. And I think that's critical to remember, because if we say, we don't believe in organized religion, but we love Jesus, we don't like the church, we've been wounded, like, it doesn't make the wounding any less real, but it also doesn't give you a pass to not be part of the community that Jesus, died for, his bride. You can't both say you love Jesus and then say you hate the very church that he came and died for.
Yeah, because I would argue that if you say you love Jesus, but you hate the church, then you don't love Jesus. Oh, you want the lighter?
Yeah, British.
Did you like that little hot take that I just said?
I missed it because I was looking for a lighter. Go ahead, say it again.
All right, I will say it again. If you say that you love Jesus, but you hate the church, then you don't love Jesus. Like, you don't get the gospel. Because the gospel is about a loving, merciful, gracious God pursuing a sinful, fallen people to the point of his own death and reconciling them back to him. And so the church is broken as it is because it's made up of you, which are broken and sinful, and us, which are broken and sinful. The gospel is meant to regenerate our hearts so that we love those that are broken and understand our own brokenness and understand that we cannot exist without Christ's life, death, burial, resurrection, his sacrifice. And it's only because of Christ that we continue to be able to thrive. And so if you say you love Jesus but hate the church, you don't love Jesus.
Preach it, brother. Yeah, I mean, to bring it full circle, I mean, that is a key piece of why we tithe, is so that our hearts, so that we're reminded to be fully dependent on God, and who's the one that gives us everything. Yeah. And if we're talking about, how the gospel changes us and rejuvenates us, it's through the reading of God's word, being reminded of his truth. It's through prayer that changes our hearts. Yep. And it's through I think tithing is part of that, where we have to put our money where our mouth is and actually say, okay, I'm gonna trust God to provide. I'm gonna give this back to him.
Yeah, And think about you just raised an excellent point there. So think about tithing in this way is that so. I've had a number of opportunities to pray for people when they've asked me, or they've come up with a need, like, hey, I have this particular need, and in the past, I've said, oh, I'll pray for you, rather than actually meeting that particular need, right?
Sure.
And so think about tithe in this way: is that we're called to meet each other's needs as they arise, and there's lots of needs that happen within the church, and so and rest assured that God sees all those needs, but He uses us to help meet those needs, and so tithing is one of those active ways in which that happens, and it's a practical way in which you can bless somebody and serve them, as opposed to if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm short on rent, and you say, well, I'll pray to God for you, when you've got extra money in your bank account and you could totally help them out.
Yeah.
So tithing and giving is that practical application of God's grace and mercy that exists on this planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would double down on that and say that even if you faithfully tithe, that doesn't get you off the hook of hearing, God call you to helping people practically in your life. Oh, that's nice. Hope the microphone picked that up. Because when we tithe, we're typically given to the church, which helps, the programs of the church, helps them do, whatever form of missions they have, helps, provide for the staff and the pastors and stuff, which is great.
Yep.
But we are still, as members of the church, the hands and feet of Jesus. We don't tithe so that we don't have to do the work ourselves. We tithe as a part of being part of the gospel community, the church community.
Yeah.
And so that might, mean, spending our time outside the church or giving when someone's in need that's not, allocated for our tithe.
And if you're a Christian that says, hey, I love Jesus, but I don't love the church, then you're not going to really be able to be in this kind of practical application of sanctification and redemption and reconciliation, where you are actively helping your fellow brethren and being the hands and feet of Jesus.
Right. Well, and I would say it's. I think you could be a Christian and have that sort of.
There's no doubt
false,
you can be saved.
Yeah,
There's no doubt that you're saved, and that's more
right.
about God's faithfulness than your apathy.
Right. Yeah. I think you can be a Christian and have that attitude and not participate in church, but I think you're going to be a severely stunted and ineffectual Christian. It's going to be really hard to do God's work and will when you're not part of His community.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a question I wanted to ask, like, as they come to me.
Yes.
Is how does this apply to dads? How does this apply to men?
I'd say in general, from my perspective, which I'd like to think is informed by the Bible.
Yeah.
Men are called, are men, husbands specifically are called to be the head of their house, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, that also, that typically entails, the financial, the providing element. Obviously, wives and mothers can work and provide, and maybe they've got more of a financial aptitude, so maybe they handle the finances. But I'd say, decision making typically done together, but I say the final say is by the dad, and the driving force of being obedient to God should be the father, the husband.
Stewardship, headship, is what we're kind of covering or implying here.
Which means that you're in charge, right? Just like what you say goes.
Yeah, that's how that goes.
Means,
that's
right?
what stewardship and headship means. And honestly, there's a couple of topics that we've said here that would be really great to unpack in other episodes. We'll have to go back and watch the video to remember what those topics
when
are.
I'm writing the notes, the show notes, I'll jot those down.
But, we're talking about stewardship and headship. And when stewardship and headship from a godly male perspective is actually functioning, I think what you see is actual submission on the husband's end, the father's end, to God the Father, to Jesus Christ, saying like, hey, all things are under your authority. All things come from you. I'm here to steward this, and that means my wife, that means my family, that means my finances, and that means recognizing that all things come from you, and that I'm going to give back to you, not because I'm obligated to, but because I get to.
Yeah.
Because I want to, because it's joyful to be able to see the gospel furthered, not just in marriage and in a family, but in the entire, in a local community as well as the entire global community.
Yeah. Well, and before we get too far away from my my joke about headship, meaning you're the one in charge, what you said goes.
Yes.
What it actually means, it's not so much a privilege as it is a responsibility. It means that you're the one held responsible for how your family goes, for what you do, for what your family does, and you'll be held accountable by God. I believe that.
I absolutely believe that. We're gonna stand before God, and we're gonna give an account for how we led our family.
Right, and I think there's no better leader in history than Jesus, who had a servant leader, a servant leader heart, because largely before that, and even modern times, a lot of leadership looks like I'm in charge, you do what I say, a dictatorship,
right?
As opposed to I'm going to serve people and lead them in that way, in a sacrificial way, which is leading from a humble heart for what's best for people, not in a I want to be served by them.
Yeah, I like how you brought up servant leader, because that's exactly what Christ is and was, and that is what we're trying to imitate.
Yeah.
When we talk about being Christ followers, and I know for those that may be watching and maybe listening, some of these words maybe you're not familiar with, but we're talking about being Christ followers. We're really talking about being servant leaders.
Yeah.
And that means like serving first. And you saw this, in the life that Jesus led. He was constantly giving of himself. He was constantly humbling himself, even to the point of death. And that's the model that we are functioning under as men. We're not trying to be chauvinists.
Mm-hmm.
We're not trying to be toxic in our masculinity. We celebrate masculinity, we celebrate femininity, but we're not trying to be toxic or put one of those above each other. And that's not what headship is about. Yeah. And we see this as a responsibility as men, especially when it comes to the issue of financial responsibility in tithing and giving. Mm-hmm. So I can't emphasize this point more, or this topic more in how I think men need to have more involvement in this area. And I understand that there's men that are hurt by the church and maybe just to hate the church altogether. And if that's one of you guys that are listening or watching, hit us up. We're happy to talk with you about that. But men, you need to be tithing. You need to be leading your family in the heart behind tithing.
Yeah,
because it's not about the religious rule, which I know oftentimes that's how the Bible is kind of packaged, but it's about the relational heart that ultimately is first towards God, the vertical relationship, that impacts the horizontal relationship with your family and other men and women in your life, especially within the church.
Sure. Yeah, this conversation is very convicting to me. We're not speaking out of like we figure this out.
Yeah,
do what we're doing. It's very convicting to me because our son just turned 10, and I've been intending to with his money to kind of teach him part of this is for saving, some's for spending, some's for tithing, and what that concept is. Which I still don't really figure out practically how that is because we tithe digitally online. Mm-hmm. We're not going physically to church much, and even if you do they even have money baskets these days?
Sure.
So how's that work with your kid? Teaching them that principle. But also as we're talking kind of servant leadership, I was thinking. Not to get too much off topic, but I'm going to. The military stuff. It's interesting because it's a secular institution, but there's these principles that are kind of woven through it. At least in the American military, for hundreds of years, And I mean, so much so that like Simon Sinek, wrote a book about it called, Leaders Eat Last. And based off of, because I'm a warrant officer in the military, so I came up through the ranks from private through specialist, sergeant, and then moved over to warrant officer. And there's this ethos, of the, obviously you respect the leaders and the officers and the NCOs above you, but there's also this leadership aspect of it, or the sacrificial aspect of it. Like, there's this culture of you take care of your soldiers. If there's limited food, you make sure they eat first, and if you go hungry, you go hungry. Because you need to take care of, kind of the least of these, if you will.
Yeah.
And if there's like banquets and celebrations and stuff, it's not the privates that are serving people. It's the generals and the colonels and the captains. Like, it's the officers that are serving the food to show, like, we're taking care of our soldiers.
Yeah. No, you know what? I'm really glad that we had this discussion on this episode tonight on tithing, because I think really what we're unpacking is like tithing is about checking your heart, and heart change, and I mean the gospel is about changing our hearts because we're jacked up from the second we're born, and the gospel is countercultural and is coming to.
It's getting even more so minute by minute.
Yeah. But the gospel is about checking our hearts, changing our hearts, and actually breathing new life into our dead hearts. And we see if heart change is happening based upon how we're tithing, how we're giving, and even just our attitude towards that. Like, it's not to say that you won't ever be able to do tithing and giving perfectly, but I think you get better at it. I think you get better at it the longer you walk with Christ, and the more authentic you are in terms of being consistent with the Bible, reading God's Word, and being in community, and actually having a willing heart to want to see the church as lovely. As difficult as that is sometimes, because you know what? You're part of the church, we're part of the church, and we're not always lovely, and so we're definitely going to make the church ugly. That's why we have Christ to redeem us. That's why we have the forgiveness of sins. So
Sure, we're not the heroes of the story.
Right, and so tithing really shouldn't be focused on, oh man, I have to give. It really should be like, man, that is so awesome. Christ gave his gave his life up. He gave his life up so that he could save us. The least I can do is give 10%.
Sure, I mean it should be, a reminder of like, isn't it awesome that God's like providing for me, that I have this abundance to be able to give.
Well, I think I feel like I've said enough on this topic.
Yeah, you have.
How about you?
No, this has been a very life-giving conversation to me. Like, I'm feeling energized and excited about it. I'm going to go home and tithe for this first quarter here that I haven't done. But it's good because it brings up opportunity to talk with my wife about it, and to kind of repent to her that like I haven't been leading well in our finances and our tithing. To talk to our son about what that means and why we do it. And how good God is.
God is good. So, on that note, I think we can kind of say, go tithe.
Arrivederci.
Go tithe, and be a part of the church. Love the church as much as the church is going to be sinful, broken, and ugly. We are part of the church, and we need to constantly be seeking Christ and making it every day about Christ. And so tithing is very, very important, and being able to give to your fellow Christian brother and sister is actually a really good thing, and quite honestly you get a lot out of it. So as always, dads, men, husbands, we love you. We care about
moms.
you, and moms
care about you too.
I always forget to put that one in there.
I know, we probably have more moms listening than dads.
Yeah,
we have to change the name of the podcast.
It's just the old-fashioned momcast. But we are going to continue recording episodes and being here smoking cigars and drinking whiskey, talking about some of these topics, and hopefully we'll get into some more hard topics. Maybe headship next time, how to find a church. I like that one. That one's a good one. I think there's a lot to say on that one. So, at any rate, check us out on the socials as usual, and in the meantime, go and spend time with your family and love them. Boom.
Thanks for joining us.